Good evening. I'll call.
Recording in progress.
I've got to remember to wait for the voice from above. I'll call to order the September 20th, 2021 meeting of the Arvada City Council and call upon Councilmember Nancy Ford.
If you'll join me, please, in a moment of silent reflection. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kristen Rush, if you'll do the roll call. Here.
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 Mr. Marriott.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would request that Councilmember Miller be excused.
Ms. Miller indicated previously she would not be here for tonight's meeting. That motion passes 6-0. Thank you. Ms. Miller is excused. Next, we have a recognition, and I'll call upon Councilmember Nancy Ford for this.
Thank you. Tonight, City Council will act on a proclamation designating that September 26th to October 2nd, 2021 be proclaimed as Source Water Protection Week in Arvada. And a representative, Kia, from the Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee will be present to accept it. So Kia, if you want to come down to the podium while I read the proclamation. Whereas the health, prosperity, and quality of life of Arvada's residents and communities depend on a reliable supply of safe, high-quality drinking water. Whereas protecting our drinking water is essential to preserve our own health and economy and that of future generations. Whereas we strive to build opportunities and work together to ensure clean, safe source water for all. Whereas Arvada residents are encouraged to recognize this precious resource and help conserve the watersheds that are the source of our water, protect our shared water resources from pollution, practice water conservation, become involved in local water issues, and plan to protect water for future community health and economic vitality. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Mayor and City Council of the City of Arvada, Colorado, that September 26th to October 2nd, 2021, be proclaimed as Source Water Protection Week in Arvada, and urge all Arvadans to join in supporting this observance. And this proclamation is dated today, the 20th day of September 2021, and signed by the Mayor and all of City Council.
Thank you for this proclamation today. I'm here on behalf of your Sustainability Advisory Committee, and the committee does look forward to working with all of you in City Council going forward regarding our economics, the well-being of the city, with issues of education and exactly how we're going to source and fund this. And so I'm looking forward to tonight's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to public comment. I have Robert Lucero. Mr. Lucero, if you'd like to address City Council.
We have been having a problem with the trash service that we've been not provided for the past month. And the fact that we were forced into the trash service, we don't appreciate either, because we can't get any other trash company to pick up in Arvada. They won't come and pick it up. And we've been in contact with Republic for the past month. They promise to pick up it daily. It will not, they don't show up daily. Every time it's a promise and a promise, and they don't show up. And I don't think it's right that Arvadans were forced into this trash service without the choice to get. It's borderline a monopoly, And Arvada was a very free and good town to live in, and this trash service is really just bringing the reputation down. Because I know I'm not the only one. And if I go to work and I don't do my job, I get fired. These guys don't do their jobs, and we still have to go through them. And it's just not right that we've paid the bills, paid the extra tags for the trash bags, and we just keep getting lied to by this trash service. And it's been a month. And I just want you guys to imagine if you had to hold your trash for a month, and then nobody's picking it up, nobody's taking it, and it's sitting in front of your house. It's embarrassing, and it's unnecessary. So I just really like to know why, if anyone can give me an answer, why we were forced into this trash service, and how come we can't use other trash companies.
Okay. Mr. Lacerda, this is your opportunity to address City Council. We don't engage in a back and forth to respond. I have your address. I will be giving it to the city manager's office. They have been very successful in getting properties such as yours to get things straightened out. I'm sorry for your experience.
Why does it have to come to this point? I mean, why can't we just call? I'm sorry, the trash service is dropping the ball horribly, and I don't understand why we're keeping them. I mean, they're not doing their job, and they haven't been, and it's not just me. You guys look on your neighborhood websites, it's everywhere. They're not coming and picking up the trash. They're not doing their job. I guess I just can't understand why we're forced into this trash service, this substandard trash service. It doesn't seem, we can't get anybody outside. It's a monopoly. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem American. We should be able to have our own choices of what trash services we want to use.
And Mr. Lucero, again, I can't get into a debate with you right now.
I don't want to debate with you.
Okay.
I just want to know an answer why we have to use this trash service.
Well, and you don't have to use that trash service. You can opt out, and you can use, there are other companies in town who are still providing trash
We had
service.
Waste Management said they no longer serve Arvada.
I understand that.
And then we went to check the other waste services, and they said, well, they will not serve Arvada. This is what I'm saying.
Well,
how is it that this one trash service has forced out all the rest?
I believe that there are still other, I will have somebody from City Hall contact you as to your specific problem and give you the other options that are available to you. Okay?
So that's it?
That's the process for public comment. Yes, sir. Okay, we have one person signed up via Zoom.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Rainer Gerbach. I reside at Geos in Arvada. I've been communicating with City Council on the subject of climate change in general and the urgency to advance construction of fully electrified homes in order to reduce emissions. The path to electrified homes is simple, with overall costs on par with or below those for traditional homes using fossil fuel. Geos homes feature these significant advantages. Number one, elimination of gas, which is nothing else but methane, a short-lived but highly potent heat-trapping gas. Two, burning gas in home creates toxic pollutants, including nitrous oxides. These pollutants create indoor air pollution levels that are illegal outdoors and are responsible for a host of illnesses. Renewable energy production while eliminating emissions aligns seamlessly with the climate action goals of the state of Colorado. The building sector is responsible for 39% of US emissions. Implementation of the GEOS concept on a broader scale can assist in rapid elimination of methane and other related emissions. The next expansion of GEOS includes 99 homes. The new developer builder team is unwilling to follow the entire GEOS design book based on the following narrative. The original concept failed and resulted in bankruptcy. A national builder was selected as an exhaustive search did not identify any local builders. The builder selected stated they're not willing to build electrified homes, supported by a statement from the GEOS architect that those homes are difficult to sell. This narrative is not only incorrect, but misleading and dangerous, given the fact that the City Council repeated these statements in an email response dated July 29, 2021. It is important that the City Council understands the correct background. There has not been a bankruptcy. The property had to be sold due to divorce settlement. A qualified local builder was and is available to build and sell new homes according to the GO's design book. GO's homes have sold near immediately with little, if any, realtor involvement, simply on the basis of sustainability. The GO's architect did not make, nor does he support, the builder's claim of merchantability. Climate change is the defining challenge of our time and the century. Climate-smart infrastructure that mitigates climate change can and must be supported on the local level. We request that the City Council correct statements made relating to GEOs and work with us in creating a platform that educates and promotes future-proof and healthy homes using qualified local builders. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else signed up for public comment? Close the public comment portion and move to Mr. Pfeiffer for first readings.
Yeah, I move that Council Bill 21-030, an ordinance repealing, retitling, and reenacting Sections 2-31, compensation of council members and the mayor of Article 2, City Council of Chapter 2, administration of the Arvada City Code, as well as, going to the next page, I move that Council Bill 21-031, an ordinance authorizing an additional appropriation to the Community Development Fund, for fiscal year 2021 be approved on first reading, ordered, published in full, and public hearing date to be set for October 4th, 2021 at 6:15 p.m.
Motions for approval on first reading. That passes 6-0 with Mayor Pro Tem Miller being an approved absence. We have no public hearings tonight. We'll move on. We do have a workshop on water and sewer infrastructure funding. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Well, this is a follow-up from an earlier workshop we had, I believe, on August the 26th. And we have Sharon Israel, Director of Utilities, who will lead off the presentation. We also have City Engineer Jacqueline Rhodes. I think Brian Archer is also going to be participating in this presentation as well.
Very good.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Thank you for your time this evening to continue our discussion on water and sewer infrastructure funding. Since our last workshop with council in August, we have been working hard to address the comments and concerns we heard from you at that discussion. Next slide, please, Kevin. So here's the agenda for our workshop this evening. In the last workshop, we had a discussion on how this work aligns with the city's strategic plan and the needs assessment of how that came out of the strategic result. So tonight we're going to share a few more details that address some of the comments we heard from the last workshop. Also, as you'll recall, the funding recommendations include an increase in water and sewer rates similar to what we've done over the last 15 years. We're also recommending an adjustment to service fees. We have done some additional work to quantify in detail what those additional funds would go to support in 2022. Then there will be a few specific questions from the last workshop we want to discuss with council this evening, and we will wrap up with a few options for your consideration and next steps. Next slide. And next slide. So you know these statements, our team is so passionate about supporting this for Arvada. This workshop really is about achieving our mission and our vision for Arvada's water and sewer infrastructure. Next slide. And you've seen these words before. Everything we're proposing is about having safe and reliable water and sewer infrastructure. We know we have work to do to build resiliency. A lot of that is reinvesting to repair and replace what was designed and built decades ago and is now at or nearing the end of its useful life. We also know that because of the master planning work our engineers and our technical experts have been engaged with since 2017. And 2017 is when we first started the journey of our master planning. We're also striving to become more and more data-driven. So this master planning process is a system that provides us the structure to analyze data about our water and sewer systems and use it to prioritize, make the right timely decisions for the city. Next slide. So I want to talk about this in a little more detail than we have the past couple workshops. I've personally been at the city for just over 2 years now. And as you know, I replaced an outstanding 40-year veteran in this role, Jim Sullivan. Jim and his leadership team set the table for us before he left to retire by having these master plans for infrastructure elevated as this city-level strategic result. Jim's strategic vision positioned us today to have enough water supply for build-out, to have a healthy water fund balance, to have bond capacity in the enterprise funds, and he also gave us this roadmap. So this specific strategic result includes a milestone. We didn't talk about this last time, but I want to highlight it tonight. This is about implementation of the master plan findings in the 10-year CIP and the performance budget. So that's a quick introduction. I'm going to recap. I'm going to hand this now to Jacqueline Rhodes, our city engineer, and she's going to expand on previous discussions with council regarding those needs we've identified in the master plans. And then Brian Archer and I will dig into some more quantitative analysis and do some line-by-line budget recommendations for you. Jacqueline?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to come present. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to begin by talking about an evolution of our master plans. I want to give an example of some of the work our team is doing to build upon those recommendations and fine-tune the results. The first project I wanted to feature was a utilities level of service project that ultimately is going to become a policy adopted by the department. And what that level of service definition really means to us, it's really helping us outline and define specific criteria for each area of the utility. Helps define risk, helps us identify and prioritize the needs of our master plan findings, and creates a common language for which all of our work systems have goals and we can communicate with stakeholders. I wanted to feature this tonight because, again, it'll become a living document that we update and present along with our budget cycle. And I just want to provide some examples because a number of the projects that we'll be talking about funding needs tonight are related to delivery of these goals. And the next slide, please. So I'm going to begin by just presenting some details related to one area, the area of water treatment. You'll see here that they span regulatory requirements, they span service goals, and even aspirational goals. So, for example, the first few items related to Safe Drinking Water Act compliance are regulatory requirements that certainly we want to continue to meet. The next few, in terms of our level of service goal for meeting water demands, are really helping us outline those planning needs. So, in this case, whether maintaining our max day water demand, which, just for reference, was over 40 MGD, a million gallons per day, last summer, or even our average day demand. And again, these help us set criteria for which we design our water infrastructure. Finally, some other examples at the bottom, whether it's attaining the Partnership for Safe Water status or implementing a certain number of vulnerability assessment projects are certainly aspirational goals that we'll continue to try and meet. Next slide, please. So this is also a slide that you've seen before, but I wanted to emphasize the work that we've done over time. So master planning is really an evolution. It's a dynamic process. And here shows some of the projects, the major improvement projects over time that required a significant amount of planning and financial capacity to deliver. And if you click the next slide, just for example, some of those major treatment plant expansions that help us come into compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, including adding pretreatment to the Ralston plant and even improvements to the systems across the Arvada plant, were actually funded via a bond issue in 2001. We made the final payment on that in December of last year, but I wanted to show again that example in that evolution of planning and delivery of our projects. Next slide, please. Here's another example project that is building upon the master plan findings to help us dial in the timing of our improvements. We all know that our infrastructure needs are impacted by our growth, the impact of water conservation, climate change, all affect the resiliency of our water system. So what we've done is we really want to inform and fine-tune the timing and the triggers for these improvements, take into account all of our system needs and projections of revenue across the system. So these techniques, again, will take into account really a cone of uncertainty around the scenario planning so that we can have better confidence in the timing of all of our future improvements. So this project just was kicked off last week. Next slide, please. Here's another example of our internal team working on what we're calling a long-term planning LTP asset database. And really what this is a building upon our current plans and our CityWorks system, we're updating the inventory of all of our assets. That includes valuing what the replacement value of those assets is, indexing the system age and current condition or remaining useful life of those assets, and how critical they are. This is going to help us, again, fine-tune and prioritize all the rehabilitation work we have ahead. Next slide, please. So finally, I want to conclude here with a summary snapshot, one figure from the handout you have in front of you. And because that handout has a number of details in it, I wanted to hit the takeaways. What we've presented to date really reflected the recommendations directly out of the master plan findings. And those master plans identified near-term, short-term, and long-term needs in certain funding and certain categories of time. We've met with the team and taken your feedback from our past workshops and attempted to push out as many projects as we could into later years, just reflecting the feasibility of funding and staffing to help deliver this work. So for example, in this version of the handout, we've included and pushed out some of our improvements into 2024 through 2028 for example, water distribution storage. So just to walk you through the slide here, the solid bars reflect projects that are currently funded in the 10-year model. The dashed bars with the hash marks inside reflect the recommended unfunded improvement projects. So you'll notice in the green bar, really our raw infrastructure, most of this is our raw water supply, our investment in the gross expansion project, and that's primarily funded through tap fees. Other examples of unfunded needs in the purple bars in those years 2024 through 2027 include major improvements to our water distribution storage facilities and pumping facilities. And then finally, an example of some of the priority large projects in the out years 20 to 2030 include expansion and rehabilitation of our water treatment facilities as pondered and set forth in the treatment master plan. So that shows you a relative distribution across areas of the water utility. And some examples of how we've attempted to push out work to align with our ability to deliver it. At this point, I think it makes sense to turn it back to you, Sharon, to talk through our funding recommendations recap.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I think you can see from Jacqueline's slides how much we're evolving each time we return to you in terms of being more data-driven, developing these systems, these structures that we can use to really make the tough decisions on what projects go first, which projects can wait. Next slide. So this is the recommendation for the rates and service fees we have proposed. There is no change since the August workshop where we discussed this last time. There's a rate increase and also a bi-monthly service fee increase. Arvada, as you know, has historically raised rates on an annual basis to smooth out the increases over time. So our community doesn't have a series of flat years and then have one big jump. In those communities where we've seen that the rates do have a big jump, it is really painful for families and household budgets. It's painful for businesses and the bottom line. So we really care about keeping that philosophy of smoothing out over time. And that's the approach we're proposing for service fees. we'd have that similar philosophy. A small increase each year would enable us to fund the projects that Jacqueline was just describing in the 10-year CIP without a huge jump in any one year.
Mr. Marriott's got a question.
Yes.
Sharon, I have a question about this slide. So this slide shows where we are in 2021 and comparatively where we would be in 2022. But what it doesn't show is the rate at which these surrounding communities are increasing their service fees and rates compared to the proposal that we would be undertaking of increasing our service fees and our rates. So to be fully, to fully get the picture, do we have an idea what that looks like? In other words, does Arvada move from the lowest to the middle to the top? And if so, over what period of time? I mean, those trajectories is kind of what I'm looking for.
Thank you. We've done some scenario modeling, looking especially at the next 5 years between now and 26. There's no scenario where Arvada moves anywhere beyond somewhere the middle. I ran a very shocking scenario, which would have been, what if we did 20% in 1 year? Not that we're recommending that, believe me, but just to sort of compare, and we land right in the middle. So I hope that kind of paints the picture that we're not moving ahead a lot faster than anyone else. The service fees that we're recommending, we have at least one other neighbor that's raised them in the neighborhood of $15 a month in the last year. So there's a lot of variability, I would say, and I'm happy to provide additional analysis on that if you'd like to see it.
Okay. And then, so that's one question. The other question I had really was then also a philosophical question. We're talking about really the different service fees versus water rates, and it seems like one of the goals here of water conservation is best served by small service fees and water rates. So more heavier users pay more and get an incentive, a financial incentive to conserve. Can you talk to that about why you'd pick this particular scenario to develop the income for the water fund versus some other possible scenario?
Yes, thank you. And when we get to the options section of our presentation, we will be providing council with 2 options. One is as proposed, and the other is what the commensurate
Okay. Don't want you to hold that till then, and you
corresponding,
can
yeah,
answer
the
that when we
corresponding
get to
rate
that one.
increase.
Thank you.
Yes, but happy to talk philosophy at that point. Thank you. The last time we increased fees was 13 years ago. It was for calendar year 2009. Service fees are that stable source of revenue. So that's the kind of financial position we need to put ourselves in so we can support the multi-million-dollar reinvestment projects identified in the master plan. So that speaks a bit to the philosophy question. I want to point out, too, that this is just for next year. So we did have questions in our last workshop about what the next 10 years look like in the 10-year model. Brian's going to be speaking to that in more detail. But we are proposing a series of small increases over time to get us to the point where we really are in a good position to reinvest in that aging infrastructure. What I'd like to show you next is where the additional revenue would come from if we move forward with this proposal. Next slide. So we kept the format as you've seen in many years in the past, I think, as we've presented budget to council. So this is starting with the water fund. With the proposal of rate and fee increases, we would be requesting an additional about $2 million more in our operating budget. That gets us to just under $30 million. A portion of that is Denver water rate increases, cost increases associated with salaries, benefits, vendor increases. With the global supply chain disruptions, we're paying between 5 and 25% more for parts and supplies across the board than we did last year, and we expect similar for next year. We also have several new positions we want to be able to fund, including transitioning some temporary staff to permanent. And we're also increasing funding for the capital reinvestment as proposed here. It would be from the service fees.
Mr. Marriott.
Yes.
And Sharon, just a quick question. So if this represents about $2 million annually in additional revenue, or $2 million next year in additional revenue, how much of that would come from the rate increase and how much of that would come from the service fee increase?
Thank you for the question. If you look at the itemized list, that $885,000 for capital reinvestment, that would be from fees and the
Okay.
remainder from rates.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. About
Yeah.
almost half and half.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thanks.
I want to pause here because $30 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to be asking from our community, and I wanted to take a moment and put it in perspective. We're doing some work, as Jacqueline described, to assess the value of all of our assets, and the ballpark numbers we're looking at right now are water supply and infrastructure are valued between $2 and $4 billion. That's billion with a B. It's a big number. So if you look at the low end, $2 billion of value, this operating budget's only 1.5% of that total value of the asset. So I hope that helps to frame what $30 million looks like when we're operating a very large and complex system. And again, that does include the additional capital reinvestment. It does not include the revenue from tap fees, and as we mentioned in the last couple workshops, we're doing additional work to right-size our tap fees so that as plan development comes in, we're recouping the costs associated with serving that new development, both from the perspective of developing new water supply and then also expanding the capacity of our infrastructure. So I'll pause here and ask if you have any questions on this slide, and if not, I can go to the sewer version of this slide.
Ms. Ford?
Sharon, these estimates, are they based on current usage right now?
They are based on current usage, thank you, which is variable. It's, we've had a lot of demand this year, so that means revenues are higher.
Okay, and is there a certain point at which, if usage were to be reduced, do we know at that point where this would not work well?
Are you thinking from a conservation type perspective?
Well, I'm thinking
of water?
if people started to conserve even more,
Sure.
at what point would that affect this model or this projection?
I'm not sure we've done an extensive study of what that looks like. Our fixed costs are the majority of our budget when we're talking about things like salaries, having water treatment plant operators on staff 24/7, 365. Whether we've got high demand or low demand, we still need operators staffing that facility. Where we've got variability in costs are things like pumping costs, electricity costs, chemical costs, that kind of thing. So if you'd like, we can provide a more detailed analysis next. But what I would say is the topic you're bringing up is non-trivial here when we're talking about needing to put ourselves in a financial position to potentially issue a bond. That's why some of the stability of the revenue that would come from service fees is an important piece of this discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Can I
You
answer
may
any other
proceed.
questions?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the sewer wastewater side of the house here. The proposal here is to add another $929,000 in the operating budget for 2022. Similar to the water fund, some of the increases are to pay for just things that are getting more expensive to buy on the market. We're increasing salaries. Metro wastewater rates have increased this year. We also have a new position in engineering. In the past, we haven't used any of the funding from the wastewater fund to pay for an engineer, and we are doing that this year. But I want to point out that the big difference between what we're proposing for 2022 of water and sewer is what we would allocate from the additional bi-monthly service fee revenue. We're not recommending that goes toward reinvestment in 2022, in part because we're still working on that master plan. We will be returning to council in a few months with the findings from that master plan and recommendations for projects to fund. But a very important piece of this is that we had exceptionally high charge from Metro wastewater in 2020. Between 2019 and 2020, the loading charges, which is the concentration of stuff in wastewater, increased in some places as much as 30%. And so that resulted in a very large settling up payment in 2021. And so our recommendation today is to continue to go on this path toward raising service fees so that in the next year we'll be able to allocate those toward reinvestment. But this year we really need to settle up with Metro and balance our budget on that line. That's also related to the $200,000 collection system analysis we're recommending. Historically, we have not, as the city of Arvada, tracked loadings very closely. We rely on Metro's sampling programs, and they're typically stable. But in a trend in the past, let's say 5 years or so, has been for Metro to charge the city more for the concentration of our wastewater and less for the actual volume of our wastewater. And so our bill comes in two components. One is for concentration and one is for our volume. We only bill our customers based on volume. And so as these things are starting to get out of balance, when we raise rates, let's say 3% as we're proposing this year, that translates into that increase in volume. But if we've got customers that are adding a lot more concentration, then our overall bill goes up more than we projected. That's exactly what happened in this past year. So some ideas that we would fund with this are some additional collection system monitoring. We also, in our current municipal code, have a fee structure and a rate structure for any type of connection that results in higher levels of loading for our system. We've never used that portion of the code in the rate structure. So part of what we could do with this collection system analysis is identify if we've got any really heavy users that are making sure that they're paying their fair share of the Metro bill. So this proposal would increase our overall operating budget to $15,677,000 as proposed. So any questions on this one?
You're good. Oh, Mr. Pfeiffer.
Yes.
Well, before you go into it, I do. So when you talk about concentration and volume, trying to define that differently. Does it have anything to do with like low water usage versus the density of what's going through the wastewater?
Yes, it's very likely that what we have is lower flows because of higher efficiency fixtures, right? So our washing machines will use less water, our shower heads use less water, but we have the same amount of wastewater stuff in there. So biological oxygen demand and the kinds of loadings that result in Metro having higher treatment costs. So that's one thing that we'd be looking at for sure.
So that being said, since we are encouraging low water usage appliances or toilets, have we considered any thought around not having that off balance by looking at what a balanced density and volume could look like to our rates?
We definitely can do that. This is our first, I would say, step toward tackling the question of, is all wastewater the same? So is wastewater coming from a single family home the same as wastewater coming from a brewery? Probably not. So within that single family home discussion, I think you're right. You know, you've got folks that are building newer homes. Everything has more efficient fixtures. That concentration could be a higher concentration compared to the volume. I think where we would look first before we looked at fixtures is if there's any very obvious discharges to our system from industrial users or from one of the two districts that discharge into the city system right now. So the two other districts are Clear Creek and Ralston Valley. We bill them completely based on flow, and we really don't have any data on what their loadings are. And so we're going to start by additional data collection and then try to tease out, is there a place that would make sense for us to employ what's currently in the code as far as a rate structure for higher loading on the industrial side? But certainly, Councilmember Pfeiffer, what you're talking about is also, frankly, part of the trend, I think, and just what fixtures are available in the ways of toilets and washing machines. We'd like to fund this so we have better clarity on what's actually happening out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. All right, well, we're going to move on to some specific questions that council raised in the last workshop. Next slide, please. Go ahead to the next one, please, Kevin. So the questions we took away from the last workshop were what are rules for enterprise funds? So there were some questions about how do we issue debt and how do they work? Won't we have more funding after gross reservoir is paid for? And then a request to be more transparent about future increases, especially in this next 10-year model. So I'm going to hand this over to our finance director, Brian Archer, and he's going to walk through these questions with you. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Sharon. Mayor and council, next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about what is an enterprise fund. So this is defined by GAAP. Everybody knows what GAAP is, right? Sure. Generally accepted accounting principles. Basically what that means is we're required to account for this type of activity separate from our other governmental activities. And it further is defined by saying that this type of activity, in this case our utilities, cannot receive more than 10% of its support from general operations. Once it goes beyond that 10%, it becomes a different type of fund. So for example, years ago we had the Arvada Center. The Arvada Center received a significant amount of support from the city, but also generated its own fees and its own revenue. But because that was greater than 10%, it didn't qualify as an enterprise fund. What benefit do you have being an enterprise fund? Ultimately, you're not subject to TABOR in the state of Colorado, and your fee increases or your debt issues can happen at the level of the authority. In this case, you, City Council, can make those changes. Doesn't require a vote of the taxpayers. And finally, it does require that fund or that program to run like a business. So it is supposed to cover its revenues through a fee structure. Next slide. The next question that we had from our last presentation is, shouldn't we have more funding to put towards capital projects after gross reservoir is complete? A very good question, and let's talk a little bit about why and how we funded gross reservoir. So back in 2008, when we were offered the ability to join in with Denver Water, we said yes, and we looked at ways to funding that long-term obligation. At that period of time, we had some reserves built up from long-term financial planning. We knew over the next 10 years we would be getting tap fee revenue, and we would build in the possibility of issuing debt. Spin forward 12 years, we had tremendous growth. We were able to collect a bunch of tap fees sooner than we thought we were going to get. And so instead of having to issue debt, we were able to take those tap fees, store them up in our reserve, and dedicate them towards gross reservoir. The other challenge we had over the last 12 years is the cost. So when we initially sat down with Denver Water, gross reservoir was supposed to, our share was supposed to be somewhere between $60 and $80 million. Today, that estimate is closer to $120 million. So certainly we've had to chase that at the same time as we've been trying to collect tap fees. This has made us have to dedicate significantly more than we thought we were going to have to 12 years ago. The good positive side of things is it did time again with quite an expansion here at the city. And so as it sits today, we have $117 million set aside to cash finance gross reservoir. Tap fees are going to still come in throughout this next 10 years, but we're moving towards build out as well. And so tap fee revenue is going to continue to decline as we have less and less houses and housing starts in Arvada, and will probably be very minimal by, let's say, 2035. So in our 10-year plan, we're reaching the end of that tap fee revenue. That has also been our source to do capital projects for the last 25 years. Another reason why we're presenting this service fee option to City Council. Finally, you'll note on this slide that we have started to model debt again in the water fund. And it is possible that we could use some of that debt financing to pay for gross reservoir over the next 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and take some of the cash that we've built up and apply it to some of the projects that Sharon and Jacqueline have identified. So that's something that we're modeling. We're not proposing that right now, but it's something we may bring back to City Council.
Ryan, what do you mean by generational equity?
So the people that will benefit the most from the Gross Reservoir expansion are truly the residents that are going to be moving in down the road. We're trying to identify the water and collect the water for future residents, not the residents of today. And so that's the comment, generational equity. It's really the people moving in the future, not necessarily the ones that live here now, because we have the water for the ones that live here now.
Thank you.
So does that help, Mayor?
Yep.
Okay. Next slide. Finally, there was a question, more a direction that was provided by City Council to be more transparent about what our future increases are and how they're built into the 10-year plan. Sharon talked a bunch about this, so we'll just quickly run through what we have over the next 4 years or 5 years, and then what we have after that. And so built into the plan is a $4 bi-monthly water and a $2 bi-monthly sewer rate increase every year. So that would mean in 2022, that's 4, 2023, that's 8, 2024, that's 12, and on from there till you reach 2026, okay? And then once we hit that year, we will stop raising that fee, and we would move to an overall 7% water rate increase starting in 2027 through 2030. The other thing we built in the 10-year plan that was presented to City Council is a debt service that would begin in 2025 at approximately $3.9 million. That would get us on a 20-year note somewhere around $46 to $50 million. That is built in with these assumptions. In conjunction with that, a very robust short and long-term communication plan has been started, and that will come out over the next few months and will run parallel with whatever decision is made by City Council. Next slide.
Can I just ask a few questions about that before we jump in there?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
So I get for 10 years, for 5 years, we're doing a 4-year annual increase. That's $20 more. What is our current fee for water?
Our current service fee?
Yeah.
$5 and
So we'll hit about $26 by
Right.
2026.
Yeah.
And then you have a 3.4 water rate increase for those same years, year over year.
it doesn't grow. That would be flat, 3.4% increase every year. So I mean, it doesn't go 6.8 and on from there.
No, but it's
yeah.
3.4 on top
Yes.
of the 3.4
Yes,
from the previous
correct.
year,
That is
3.4
correct,
from the
yes.
previous year. So, and then in the 10-year model from 27 to 30, you're going to have a 7% every year.
That is what is built in there today. That is correct.
If I could, I know you might not, I don't think you have this on now, but it would be nice to know what a normal household, I think it was Mr. Marriott was asking this, or somebody was over here, but what does this look like to an average household from today on? Because I see percentages, and yes, they seem like they're single digits, but at the end of the day, it could be double or triple digits. So,
You would like to see that not
Yeah,
only
because
for
your increase
next
is-
year, but for the next 10 years
yeah,
as
so
well.
2022 through 2030, what is an average household, $798, I think is what you're proposing for 2022. Well, what does it look like in 23, 24, 25, 26, all the way to 30 with these numbers?
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, that will work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Just wanted to bring up again a very high-level look at the 10-year model. After we already talked about what's built into it, you will notice at the end of our 10 years, we're basically sitting at our required fund balance goal. And so we are putting to work all of these proposed increases, putting them out into the system and making sure that we're applying them to the capital projects. If City Council decides to not move forward with any of these increases, obviously it would require us to make changes to the proposed that Sharon presented. That list that showed you all the operating increases and then the capital items down at the bottom.
And Brian, the increase for 2022, where is that reflective in here? Is it just peppered through because fees is on line 1? So would those fees be in the 3.9 million? And then your increase would be under charges for
Correct.
service? Is that how
Correct.
that's peppered in?
Correct.
Okay. It just seems if we're increasing fees that it wouldn't go from 4.06 to 3.9 if fees are being increased.
There's some other items that are built into that
Licenses and permits.
fees. Yeah,
So
sorry
you-
about that.
So you expect those to go down?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Good catch, though. If city council accepts the proposal for us to increase the fees, we're actually creating a completely separate line item for that. And in futures, you will see that line item if you accept that proposal. And that way, it will be easier to and more transparent. And I did want to point out that this does start on page 113 of the budget document, in case you want to follow along. Next slide. And the same pieces of information for our wastewater fund, reflecting the same, that we have put all of those proposed dollars to use. If there's no questions, I'll turn this back over to Sharon.
Very good.
Thank you, Brian, and to council for the discussion. So to wrap up the workshop this evening, we have a few options to suggest, and we'd like to receive feedback from council on these. Next slide. Councilmember Marriott, this is the question you had asked earlier. So option 1 is to proceed as presented and recommended by the city team. So that is the increases to bi-monthly service charges for water and sewer. And the rate for water is 3.4% and rate for sewer 2.6%. To raise the comparable amount of revenue, we modeled that, and if we wanted to keep service fees the same and only increase rates, the recommendation is 7.3% for water and 6.3% for sewer. Option 3 is to reprioritize the reinvestment work identified in the master plans and defer it for the future. We do not recommend this option. It increases risk both of system failure and potentially being unable to support the plan development. We know the work needs to be done and we need to get started. So that said, we don't recommend postponing, but I do want to raise it up because it's an option that you have.
Very good. Mr. Marriott.
Yeah, Sharon, I have a question for you. So is the plan, I believe we adopt these fees and water rates annually, but this plan is really kind of based on additional fee and rate increases annually. So what we would be adopting this year would be just the first year of a kind of a planned 10 consecutive years or 9 consecutive years of increases.
Mark's nodding his head.
Yes, the fees are approved as part of the budget adoption, and that occurs on an annual basis.
Okay. And if there were anywhere in that time where a council were to decide due to circumstances or who the personnel are here or whatever to not do those in any one year, does that just stretch your timelines out? Is that really the effect it has, or does how particularly when you start talking about bonding, I worry about how much is that tied to the fulfillment of 9 future years of a plan?
Yeah, actually, that's going to partially answer your first question as well. So, yes, we would be concerned that we would bond off of a certain coverage ratio, and so that's what we built our estimates off of, and the coverage ratio takes all of your history of usage and blah, 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 right? So part of the reason of moving towards a service fee model, it also helps strengthen that argument so that if you do have up or down years, not only on usage, but also maybe on increases, that it smooths your revenue as well. And so that is one of the reasons, among many others, that we would push for a service fee model versus just a regular increase.
Yeah, but the capacity to bond is based on increasing service fees annually too, not just a one-time service fee increase. So once that's in there, that gives you your bonding capacity. your bonding capacity is really based on service fee increase this year, followed by one next year, followed by one,
That is correct.
and on down the line. So it seems like that's maybe almost just as
It
risky.
is. It is. You're
Just
correct.
takes the risk of conservation or usage changes out.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
So, Brian, before you leave, so the $38 million bond that just paid off last December 2020, where did that money go that we don't pay anymore?
So we rolled that back into the model, and it was programmed with our prior 10-year models. So basically, the 2010 to 2020 10-year model, once that started, so 2021, then those were programmed at that point.
Programmed
So
into this enterprise, or?
correct. Programmed in the enterprise and put towards capital, basically.
So it is in these numbers on the spreadsheet?
It is. That is how we were able to fund the projects that they have already accomplished.
Okay, so you've already accounted for that money. And
We
then
have.
on this spreadsheet, this is assuming, as is today, no additional funds. Is this what these project lists look like?
I'm going to phone a friend on this one.
So the handout in front of you does not account for the bonding program.
Not bonding, let's just say fees and percentage increase is what I'm asking.
Not currently reflected in there.
So
So the only
everything-
thing shown above the line is, and shown in blue, is reflected in the 2022 approval only. Everything beyond 2022 is shown as unfunded.
Oh, but up here, you have like Gross Reservoir, that's still funded.
Correct.
Further out, so it's not past 22, it's whatever's on this top of the list is funded in the 10-year model.
Correct.
Now, if we add the fees and the percentage increase, does any of the below the line get funded?
Moves up.
And we've identified those, or is this by the project line is when it's identified? Because the
That's-
project line's a little off than when the expenses are due. So I wasn't following. So if we get some of this extra money, I don't know how much exactly, I mean, it's about 2 million a year, roughly 2-3 million. That some of these below line will start getting funded, right?
Correct.
Okay. And are they in a particular order, or it's just?
In an
we'll just
order
figure
by
it out?
timeline. Again, we hope to fine tune that with some of the projects that I presented.
Okay. Because it does show like here, just so I can understand, the raw water residual handling is project between 2021 and 2023 it ends, but the payment is not, 15 million is not till 2024.
So that is something I'd like to present some of the findings to council based off the concept design work underway. The cost estimates are coming in currently much higher than was originally budgeted. So we've asked the design team to go back and tell us what they can recommend to extend useful life of what we have with what is currently funded in the budget. And I've shown the remainder as an unfunded need that hopefully we could continue those improvements in the out years.
Okay, might not be quite following, but we can always take it offline. It's just the payment for the project didn't seem like a line, and then how much money we end up getting. I'm trying to figure out how much are we really benefiting and making a dent in your, $250 million worth of work that $2 million does, and how much work can you really do in 2022 through 2026?
Yes,
when
I'm
it's
with
only
you.
$2 million a year and you have
Correct.
$250 million,
Yeah.
and unfunded, it doesn't seem that this list is actually realistic to be achieved.
So again, that's I think you'll find one of the largest needs that we've identified is the water treatment plant expansion and rehabilitation project, as well as some of the storage projects. So that's part of the demand forecasting scenario analysis work that we're doing right now to better define whether any of those improvements could be pushed out beyond 2030.
Okay, just because they're here and we approve this approach doesn't mean you're going to do any of this work, really. Maybe some of them, but not the list.
Nothing that's below the line.
Okay, and so when you came up with this list, there was a slide on here that talked about asset management and that you were going to use a system to try to figure out your asset management. So I'm trying to understand, if you don't have a clear list of your asset management, how did you produce a list?
So this list was produced directly from the master plan findings. What we're trying to do is fine tune the timing and the trigger for those improvements based off of these additional projects. So we're just building on and pushing out those master plan findings based off of what we can fine tune in the asset management approach, as well as the water demand forecasting, which is looking specifically at conservation, climate change, revenue projections to help us again dial in how far we can push
Okay,
out
so the
these
asset management
projects.
system will just help you dial in your project and your scope of these findings.
Correct. So
Okay.
we're looking at both likely and unlikely failure scenarios, likely being ones that we can plan for, and unlikely being a combination of multiple likely failure scenarios. That's allowing us, again, to fine tune based off of actual replacement value, these numbers in the list. That's why I want to emphasize what we'd presented previously was directly out of the master plan, identifying a number of projects that they said were needing to be implemented in that 3 to 5 year time frame. That just wasn't realistic based off of our current plans.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll let you complete, and I've got some comments I want to make. So.
Thank you. This concluded my slide on the options unless there are additional questions. I believe Mr. Devon was interested in making some additional remarks to wrap up. Next slide, please.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thanks for your attention and your questions during this session. What I wanted to do is offer a little bit of perspective, certainly from at least the city management standpoint. We are responsible for a $2 to $4 billion value of water infrastructure, as Sharon indicated earlier. As Jacqueline indicated, we're doing risk assessment to determine what are the real risks and what are some of the issues that we need to deal with, both short and long term. A couple of examples that are on this slide. You'll recall the 2013 floods. We had a technical violation for turbidity that was caused by mud flow into our watershed that found its way into the Ralston Water Treatment Plant, and we had to account for the impact that had on our water treatment at that time, and we were actually issued a violation associated with the turbidity that occurred. Now, I think in the case of the 2013 floods, that was certainly an understandable natural event that caused the violation. That would be one of those unlikely scenarios that Jacqueline referred to earlier, but I think it's something that was understandable in the long run. The ones that are less understandable is, for example, what Castle Pines went through this summer when they were issued a boil water advisory due to chlorination and pump station failures. Pump station failures, or pump stations, are among the assets that we're looking at as part of the work that Sharon and Jacqueline described, and it's part of the work that was identified in the master plan. Certainly, we want to make sure that assets such as our pump stations don't fail, that those assets are replaced or receive major capital maintenance at the proper time. Otherwise, we could be dealing with the same kind of situation that Castle Pines dealt with this summer. In Inglewood, they also had a boil advisory that was issued due to E. coli contamination that was actually detected at a single house. Based on the fact that it was detected at that single house, they had no idea how far that contamination had spread throughout their system, so they had to issue a boil water order. Years ago, our forefathers, if you will, that were responsible for managing this utility system, invested in sampling stations that are separate from the residential and business properties. And so when we have a situation where we have to test water, we can go to our sampling stations because we know that that water is straight out of our system and not potentially contaminated by mixing with other water in a single family residence or a business or something like that. We've been working towards this critical point for years. Again, Sharon mentioned that our former utilities director had commissioned or came up with the idea of the master plan. It was included in your strategic plan because he felt it was the right thing to do in terms of making sure that our assets remained serviceable over the long term. When that work was done, it was July of 2019. We presented it to the leadership team in November of 2019 as part of our process for determining what our priorities would be going forward. In 2020, we intended to bring it to you at that time. Unfortunately, we had other issues that we were dealing with, one of which was how we were managing the pandemic that we were taking on at that time. The fact of the matter is, what we've presented here is a recommendation based on our assessment of risks, based on everything we know now. I think Jacqueline just pointed out in the response to the questions from Councilmember Pfeiffer that we are continuing to evolve this. We're continuing to look at our assets and determining what assets need to be attended to right now and what assets maybe can be deferred for a longer time. But based on the best information that we have right now, that is what was built into the recommendation for option one. We believe that adjusting the fees, creating the administrative or reinvestment fee kind of stabilizes our revenue source, gives us the opportunity to look at bonding in the future should that be something that we decide to do. But most importantly, it provides us for options for making sure that we replace our assets on a timely basis before they fail, before there's a problem, and making sure that we have the ability to do and honor what we have said in our strategic plan. One of the principles that we put into the strategic plan for infrastructure, it reads the following, and you've heard it before, but I think it's worth repeating now, that we provide the community with safe, reliable, high-quality utility system for full city build-out as defined in the comprehensive plan, and that this includes maintaining utility rates at the lowest practical levels with accurate billing that supports the replacement of aging infrastructure to maintain this robust utility system. We believe that we're doing that with the recommendation, certainly in 2022, as you look at 2022 in comparison to the rates of the neighboring communities in 2021, we still remain at the bottom of the market. Sharon mentioned that our projections have us moving up into a little higher than the bottom of the market with our future increases, but I believe we still will be at least in the mid-level, if not in the lower 1/3 of our total rates for utility systems in Arvada. And I believe if we can continue to apply our resources in a strategic manner, we can keep this system serviceable over the long term, resilient over the long term, and provide the city, our citizens and our business owners with that safe, reliable, high-quality water that we're known for. So that's why we're making the recommendations that have folded into this presentation, and certainly we wish to receive your feedback and continue to have this conversation.
Okay, let me begin. And I'm going to invoke the ghost of Don Howard here. When we do studies, we don't just put them on the shelf. We implement them. There was a reason that Jim Sullivan urged us to undertake these studies. He was a brilliant man who, and I'm talking about Jim Sullivan, not Don Howard. Don was certainly brilliant too, but certainly Jim Sullivan oversaw this for so long and so well, and I think we are doing a disservice to what has happened here in Arvada for decades in terms of where we are on water and sewer and also now stormwater, that we have really led the pack by being able to keep rates low, that we've had an excellent system, but we have to maintain that excellent system. And certainly the reality is that these master plans are legitimate. There may be some question in terms of timing, in terms of how quickly you do some of these things, and I'm very pleased to hear from our city engineer that they are looking at what those priorities need to be, but they're all consistent with what these master plans are. The reality is, these things have to be paid for one way or the other. And I'm convinced that, if anything, we probably should have been increasing our fees on an annual basis for several years. But the reality is, it's still generating the same number of dollars. It's a combination of the fee and the rates. And I'm convinced, and I think Mr. Devon has stated it correctly, that we need the stability of having a portion of this on a more stable aspect with the fees. It's an existing fee that we're adjusting appropriately to recognize the infrastructure and our commitment that we've always had in Arvada of taking lasting care of what we have. So I think that it's appropriate that a portion of it be funded by an increase on a gradual basis of fees, and that you continue to have the rates over and above that, which can fluctuate the usage can fluctuate greatly. If we have a very wet year, there's not as much water usage. If it's a very dry year, there's going to be much higher water usage. And remember, we like to have green lawns here in Arvada, and we don't want people not watering because the rates, and we've seen this in other communities, where the rates and the structure of the rates is such that people just stop watering, and their yards look horrible, and that's not what we want to see here in Arvada. So I, for one, will be fully supportive of staff's recommendation on this. Mr. Marriott.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to make just a couple comments to answer a couple questions. So in general, I agree as well with this, certainly the concept of taking care of our one of our core missions here as a city with water and sewer. There's parts of this that gives me just a little bit of pause in that when we're kind of building a model counting on fee increases for some time in the future as opposed to just now. But I guess I really don't see any other realistic way to do it. And I think the question was answered to me when it was, well, what happens if in some year or years fee increases are not granted by the council for whatever reason that may be? And the answer being that, well, then these projects will get pushed out further. So I don't see that as a fatal flaw. I think if we talk about bonding, I believe that's a discussion we would have at the time we were to undertake any type of a bonding project. So I'll just leave that for then. So, I think there's a lot of ways to go about it. These are really, really important conversations. I think really heavy decisions to make because we're really putting in place here a philosophy by which we're going to pay for and take care of these systems. And so, in looking at what our options are, everything, I think that slide of what options might be, I think that was enlightening as well. I believe that this is probably the right approach as well. And so I'll be supporting this approach too. So thank you.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
So here's my pause. My hesitation is when you look at the budget on page, I don't know what page it is, but when you talk about the budget, only 40% of the $2 million increase is going to reinvestment. But yet in year 2023, you have $14 million of unfunded activities. You're asking for $858,000. So I think I struggle with how are you to achieve working on the unfunded projects, which I feel that's the ask, because that's not what's funded, is to cover those projects. I don't see how you can. And I think that's where I struggle is even if that goes up $50,000, $100,000 a year, I don't understand how you can get to 14 million, 30 million, 18 million, 16 million, 19 million of unfunded projects with less than $1 million every year for reinvestment. So, Brian, you're more than welcome to come up here and kind of help me with it, but I'm not seeing how the math works out. And I could be really dense about this.
No, that's a really good question. So the 858 is what we would gain in the first year, and then we would be doubling that and then adding to it each year after that. So by the fifth year, that number becomes roughly 4.2 million. The challenge there is, to answer your question, you still don't have enough money for an extended period of time. And that's why we're proposing bonding to try to pick some of those projects off. This certainly will not fully fund that list of approximately $250 million of need.
So my reservation in this conversation is, I see you want fee increases and percentage increases, but I'm not seeing how they apply to address the issue. You show us this $250 million billion of, oh my gosh, these are problems. And yes, we have to address some additional funding sources, but I don't see the way through the forest on this without a clear map. And how do I make sure that the $858,000 to $4.2 million in year 2026 is earmarked to reinvestment, or capital, or its capacity and reinvestment? That is it, because what I feel is they're going to say, well, it's $858,000. Something else has changed, priorities change, and all of a sudden the below the line never gets addressed. And then we hear the story again in 2 or 3 years. I get water's important, but I also want to make sure the dollars we're asking for are going directly to what we are being presented.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question, and part of the reason why, if we're granted this, we would create a separate line item for the revenue, and then the corresponding capital projects will be presented to you each and every year. So
Yeah.
certainly understand your concern there.
It's just we don't remember these lists year over year. And did you move the cheese on us? I don't know. I'm not saying you do, but we got to, somebody's got to watch this to make sure if we're going to raise, $4 to $7, $8, $9, $10 million worth of revenue off fees and percentages, that this list gets smaller. That there's an exit, there's an end to this game.
Right. So in addition to what Brian said about creating a separate accounting mechanism for the reinvestment fee, the other thing we will do is as we fine tune what Jacqueline just discussed in terms of understanding our assets and understanding what needs to be replaced sooner rather than later and what can be pushed off, these projects will end up in our 10-year CIP. And that is your accountability tool. We put that in the 10-year CIP. You guys approve it. We are accountable for executing on that CIP, just like we're accountable for executing on the budget and making sure that the levels of service that you approve in terms of funding are executed by us, whether it's police services, whether it's park services, whether it's infrastructure services. Those are mandates, and you hold us accountable based on the fact that you approve a budget that we have to execute the levels of service on. And it's the same thing with the 10-year CIP. That's why we do 10-year CIP capital planning, because it holds us accountable for making sure that those projects, be they in year 2, be they in year 3, or be they in year 10, are on the list and executed at the appropriate time. Now, we might adjust it from time to time, but that's when we have to bring it back to all of you in order to discuss what we're readjusting and why.
Well, the fee will give a steady revenue source. So, I feel comfortable with that without having a variable percentage. So, I feel comfortable. This is a lot of money, and this is going to be a change to our citizens who are used to paying $5 in fees to go to $26 in fees in less than 5 years. That's one. And then yet, see, the percentage goes up. So we're going from an average of $66 a month to possibly $130 a month in less than 5 years, doubling. So we just need to, that's why I want to see what is the average house over the 10 years, as well as I would like to see an improved, what is your funding and how does it deal with the unfunded? That's the next scenario I think I need to see before I feel comfortable to put my John Hancock on it. But, right now I agree with staff recommendation. I think there's still some fine tuning that council should be aware of. All right, thank you.
Okay, I see no other lights. Mr. Manager, you have your direction?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we do.
Thank you. Do we have anyone that wishes to address City Council for public comment at this time? Seeing none, I'll close that public comment portion, open up for City Council comments. Remember to keep them short because tonight is Lauren Simpson's wedding anniversary, and I know she wants to get home.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. I just got busted about why I've been rather quiet this evening.
Okay, I've got one brief comment to make tonight. We lost on September 8th a member of our community who was very instrumental for a number of years, Bill Knott, who was the library director for almost 40 years here in Jefferson County. I had the pleasure of being on the library board from 89 to 99, got to know Bill Knott quite well, and he was certainly a champion for library services in our county, was the overseer of many great projects, including the Arvada libraries that were built, particularly Stanley Lake, the planning for the Arvada library that's in Old Town, Golden Library, Evergreen Library, the newer Lakewood Library, and others. And he is where I first learned the value of 10-year budgeting and planning. He did it down there for many years, and it was a great tool. And so when Mr. Devon came to Arvada and indicated that he wanted to implement that kind of program, I was immediately a believer both in Mr. Devon, but also in the value of that 10-year modeling, because it does give us really good guidance and ability to avoid surprises and to keep our finances in good shape. Bill was a great man. He lost his wife a couple years ago and had 2 children, and will be missed by our community. He was a resident of Arvada for a number of years, served on one or more committees here at the City of Arvada, in addition to his dedicated service to Jefferson County Public Libraries. Mr. Devon?
Mayor, members of council, the only thing I want to mention is next Monday we will have a presentation on the proposed budget, and that is the only item on the workshop agenda, and we look forward to the discussion.
Ms. Morris, anything from the City Attorney's Office?
Nothing from me, Your Honor.
Very good. We stand adjourned.